We are having a very strong panel today because we really need to find out what exactly is the reality between the ROK and the DPRK with the recent development. First of all, very importantly, we have been reading from at least American media, Mr. Walsh, that there has been possible buildup of military, particularly nuclear enrichment in Pyongyang by just looking at the melting snow on the rooftop of the buildings in Pyongyang. How reliable are these signs in telling the latest development?
You know, unfortunately, we know a lot more about North Korea than we used to, but it's still the most closed country in the world. And there are always rumors and reports, and it's very hard to confirm them. As you point out, there's been the suggestion that there's a second enrichment facility at Yongbyon. That would be bad news. That would mean that they're producing more material for more weapons. And it comes in a context where there are rumors that in October there may be a missile launch. And as you pointed out in your reports, we've had a couple of attempts to reach out to North Korea in the past month or so, both with the letter that they tried to transmit to the DPRK, inviting talks, and also the visit of Madam Park, and nothing, not Madam Park, Madam Lee, and nothing seems to be going anywhere. So all these things together are when you put them all together, they're not pointing in the right direction.
Ms. Kim, there seems to be very conflicting information coming from the U.S. side as well. For example, David Albright, who used to be a negotiator for the six-party talks coming from the U.S., was suggesting the other day that DPRK might have even 10 to 15 nuclear weapons at this moment. Of course, he has not anything specifically to prove that. However, on the other hand, we also see the U.S. negotiator, Mr. Siller, visiting Northeast Asia and suggesting the U.S. is interested in expressing its flexibility in negotiating with Pyongyang. So how should we read also conflicting ideas coming from Washington?
Well, I don't think there are any conflicting messages in Washington. I think Washington has made it very clear, Washington and Seoul, as a matter of fact, have made it clear that they are open to dialogue. They are open to meeting. Washington has said they are open to meeting Pyongyang bilaterally without preconditions. Of course, in the six-party format, there are preconditions, but bilaterally, Washington has said it is willing to meet anytime, any place. Now, Jim Walsh has raised a very important point here that all these signs are not pointing in the right direction. At the same time, I do not think we should be surprised at all that North Korea is building up its nuclear missile capabilities. It has a national interest to do so. It has every political and technical reason to do so. Now, the question really now becomes, what will the U.S. and the international community do to try to curb its nuclear and missile developments?
What role will China also play? That's, of course, has always been a question, particularly if we're doing this debate here from China. Mr. Gao, given your information and knowledge, with the background that Mr. Wang Yi, the foreign minister, expressed right after the Iran deal was in a way reached, saying this could be a very good example for regional conflict resolving process, including the denuclearization process on the peninsula. Obviously, it didn't happen that way.
Well, first of all, I think China's official position is firmly against nuclear weapons on the Korean Peninsula, and China does not want to recognize anyone on the Korean Peninsula as a nuclear weapons state. So that position is a very firm commitment. Secondly, I would say by providing the framework for the six-party talks over the past 10 years or so, China has set a good example of facilitating such negotiations, try to reach a settlement of the issue through peaceful negotiations. It doesn't work all the time, but I think the commitment of all the parties to the six-party talk remains the best hope for resolving this nuclear weapons issue on the Korean Peninsula.
At this moment, we have to make clear to our audience there has not been any specific response coming from Pyongyang suggesting yes or no relating to the latest report coming from the United States about the building up by the DPRK in Pyongyang. But having said that, Mr. Hoare, coming from London, I understand you have been this pioneering figure from your country going to a DPRK. Given your knowledge and judgment of that country, culturally speaking, political culturally speaking, what do you think is this moment? What is this moment about? Different kinds of actions, rhetorics. How should we interpret it?
It's a very difficult question. The world has changed a lot since I was in Pyongyang 14 years ago. At that time, things looked hopeful. They don't look hopeful anymore. And I think the incident last week, whoever was responsible, the mine incident, shows that the tensions between the two Koreas are as strong as ever. Neither trusts the other, neither believes the other, and that is not a very good basis on which to move forward. I think that frankly, I've always thought for the last 5 years the six-party talks are dead. They were a good initiative. They brought the parties together. They got the Americans and the North Koreans talking to each other, but that all was then. It isn't now.
All right, Mr. Hort.
I think the problem...
Mr. Hort, since you talk about the incident happened in the DMZ between the two countries last week, it killed it hurt two soldiers coming from ROK, South Korea, and according to the US-led UN Command's investigation, it suggests that DPRK was planting the mine, yet though DPRK has not denied it, has not saying, yes, we did it either. So what is your judgment, given the very complicated political atmosphere in both countries now?
I think we don't know, really, is the answer on the mine at this stage. You will remember that when the incident first happened, the South Korean authorities said they didn't think it was North Korea, and then subsequently they said they did. Now, we haven't seen the evidence, but the chances are that some form of mine was a new mine, not an old mine. There are lots of old mines in the demilitarized zone, but a new mine was planted, and planted in an area that it was known that South Korean troops would patrol. At the same time, you can, because it is the demilitarized zone, because there are old mines, you can always deny this. And I suspect that the North Koreans are effectively saying it was nothing to do with us. But nobody is probably likely to believe that.
I see.
It's not going to make things really much different from the situation we're in now. North and South are not talking. There is no sign of any rapprochement between them.
But certainly,
small signs like...
But certainly it seems that the atmosphere is getting a little bit harsher as a result of this. And therefore, may I ask you, Ms. Kim, both the United States and the ROK has not signed yet the Ottawa Treaty, which is banning the landmines. U.S. pledged it would not do it except in the DMZ together with the ROK. So can we really know the truth about who planted the landmine and how it eventually hurt the two South Korean soldiers?
Well, this is a question you'll have to ask landmine experts, but I do believe the investigation is still underway, and we'll have to see the evidence that arises from this investigation. Now, I agree with Mr. Hor's comments that this situation will not make the situation on the peninsula any worse than it has been, but there is an important point here, is that even though the North Pyongyang has also said that it is open to dialogue, but such actions, such provocative actions, makes it very difficult to re-engage the North on terms that are mutually agreeable.
But we see that the ROK has also been taking action, some very harsh actions, at least coming from the outside as we see it. For example, restarting the propaganda broadcast across the border toward the DPRK.
Right.
This is the first time since 11 years ago. So what do you make of these reactions would mean for the bilateral relations? Go ahead, Dr. Kim.
Like mud.
Right, and so that the reaction from South Korea, from the ROK, it definitely makes sense. Any country would react in response to a landmine explosion to protect its citizens, to send a clear message both to its domestic constituents, but also to North Korea to say that South Korea and the U.S. together stand ready, and they're expressing their combat readiness against future North Korean provocations. Now, the loudspeaker campaigns, these can be seen as or interpreted as psychological warfare, putting on psychological pressure on North Korea. It's something that the North has bristled about. It's something that South Korea has agreed to refrain from doing in the past, but it started up again. So it's a non-violent way to retaliate against the latest landmine incident.
It is not just the propaganda broadcast toward the North that has restarted, but also some military drills using heavy weaponry together with the United States, and ROK, of course, has started on top, Mr. Gao, of the original existing military exercise between these two countries. It seems that there has been an escalation of tensions coming from all parties involved, Mr. Gao.
Well, on the one hand, I don't think we need to over-worry about the current tensions on the Korean Peninsula, mainly because if you look at the past 6 decades, in the situation involving North Korea and South Korea, there are occasional flaring up of the tensions, escalation of the tensions, but more or less the tensions can be manageable. And I hope this time the mine explosion and the propaganda campaign launched by ROK against DPRK can eventually also be toned down by both parties. On the other hand, I would say the lack of an effective way to deal with the existing tensions and the lack of any real prospect of a fundamental final solution to the division of the Korean Peninsula. That's still worrisome, mainly because North Korea now is in possession of nuclear weapons, even though major states do not want to recognize DPRK as a nuclear weapons state. And with nuclear weapons in its possession, DPRK can really change the landscape completely and profoundly. And I think major powers really need to look at the situation on the Korean Peninsula and come up with more effective ways to engage both DPRK and ROK to push for a final solution.